Now, there are times, of course, in art where it's pretty much just drudgery. It's cranking out those anatomy studies or doing, really tedious perspective, but you got to do that stuff so that once you develop those skills, you really can take your mind off that and get back to the art. I don't think it's a really good idea to only focus on, say, the technical aspects and forget the fun stuff of creating the imagery. So I think that the technical aspect and the creative aspect should really be taught or learned simultaneously. Too much devotion to one or the other is just going to leave you stranded and probably not very satisfied with your work. If you have too much creative training and not enough technical knowledge to support it, your pieces are just going to be visually very poor. You're not going to be able to pull off the great ideas and the great creativity that you've got. But on the other hand, if you have too much technical knowledge and not a drop of creativity, your work is going to be technically fantastic, but there's going to be nothing there. It's going to be cold, it's going to be dead, it's not going to excite you at all. And a lot of people get into a rut of obsessing over the technical and completely forget about the creative and end up with beautifully drawn pictures of things that they don't care about. So I would stress, if you find yourself on either side of these extremes, to find something in the middle. Do the technical exercises, do the anatomy studies and all that. But don't forget to have fun and create those compositions just out of your imagination. When you do that, it'll give you a reason to do those technical exercises. When you are creating, say, figures from your imagination, and you get to the arms and you don't know what to draw because you don't know the anatomy, when you go and do those anatomy studies, you're going to have an appreciation for what you need to learn. So you're going to learn even faster. And I'm saying this all, of course, to myself just as well as anyone else. I personally probably lean too much towards the creative side of things lately and am sort of neglecting my technical studies. If I had all of the time in the world, I would be doing much more landscape painting and much more studies from photographs. So I would advise all of everyone else to do that, and I will strive to do them myself. Here you can see I'm using the rotate tool in Photoshop. It was added in, I think it was CS4, and was one of my favorite additions to it. I think Painter has had it for years, and Photoshop just now has it. I haven't used it much in this piece because there hasn't been very many straight lines, and that tends to be what I use it for. It's very good for getting a straight line and being able to manipulate things like that. Now, if I was working on a piece, say, with a lot of architecture or other man-made elements, you would be seeing me use the rotate tool quite a bit. I'm starting to get to the end of this piece, but you'll notice that my working process, hasn't really changed a whole lot for the whole time, and it won't up until the very end. I'm still working over the whole image and trying to develop it all at the same time. Admittedly, I'm getting a little bit tighter, a little more refined, starting to get in there with a really small brush and add in some details, but I'm never forgetting the whole image. So you'll see how I'm turning the layers on and off to see what I've been doing lately, make sure I'm heading in the right direction. The thumbnail in the upper right, I am so often referring to, because you want to make sure that that original image that you had, 20 minutes into it, when you had first established the overall color and lighting, that you don't lose that, that you keep to it. And you don't necessarily have to be a slave to it. You can deviate from it, but you only want to be improving things from that thumbnail stage. It happens a lot that people will make a really strong dynamic thumbnail, and they'll lose a lot of that when they take it to the final. And there's a lot of reasons for that. For one thing, as I mentioned, just deviating from that original vision. People lose sight of where they're going and just head off into this completely wrong direction that's a lot weaker. There's also the fact that a thumbnail will always have something that a refined piece won't. A quick sketch will have an energy and a life to it that it's really, really hard to keep in a finished, rendered out piece. And while it's a good idea to keep all of this in mind and to try to capture that energy as you go along and finish a piece out, it's not something you should stress about too much. Even great, amazing artists will have something in their sketches that their finished work just doesn't have. The immediacy of a sketch is really alluring to artists in particular. Oftentimes, people who don't appreciate art that much won't see much in a drawing, but can usually appreciate a painting because it's big and it's pretty and all that. But as artists, we seem to have this fascination with sketches. There's something really true and alive about them. In fact, there's almost a danger for artists to get too caught up in sketches that they never bring something to a finish. And while work like that might have some dynamic energy to it, it'll never quite have the emotional depth that a finished, refined piece can have. You can see here that I've been adding a little bit of bounce light to the figures in the foreground. Bounce light is something that single-handedly can make a painting so much more believable. Light, as we all know, bounces off objects and it continues to bounce off objects. That's the thing that a lot of people seem to forget about. They can sometimes get the fact that light will cast on an object and fall on it, but they tend to forget that light that falls on objects also bounces off those objects. And the influence of that bounce light and of the color it picks up from the objects that it hits on will tie your whole image together. For me, tying the whole image together is so easily done with light that it's one of the great things that I find about light. It unifies a piece like nothing else. There's a lot of theories about color harmonies and whatnot, but personally I find that if you stick with realistic, believable lighting, that your image will harmonize itself. And the reason it'll do this is because the light will influence all of the objects around it. If you stick something red in the middle of a room, any light hitting that red object is going to bounce off it and influence the walls of the room, so that the colors are not quite so localized and fake looking. That's the reason things look believable. So that's another thing as you're going about your daily lives and observing the world around you, is to really notice the bounce light. Notice that if you stick a white piece of paper under your chin, your whole face is going to be illuminated if you're standing in the sun. And if you stick a fluorescent green piece of paper under your chin in that same sunlight, your face is going to turn a sickly green. It's that effect of color and light bouncing around and influencing everything around it that's going to tie together your whole image, probably even better, if not at least the same amount, as learning all about triadic color schemes and cross-complementary color schemes and all that jazz. No, I'm not saying you shouldn't learn this stuff, because all of that stuff comes in handy and there's a lot of great masters that used it. But at the same time, I would say that light and color should come a lot more naturally than a lot of color theory books will seem to suggest. But again, that's probably one of those things that 100 people will tell me I'm wrong on. So take it with a grain of salt, as with most of the things I've said. And with that, I think we're right about to finish up this painting. Putting up a few last touches, some ambient effects, really subtle things just to push it a little bit more. And it's just about time to put my signature on it. I tend to do them very small and somewhere in a dark little corner so they're not too obvious and overpowering. And with that, I think we're done. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Noah Bradley, and go paint something amazing.